right, I think we've reached a critical mass, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Antoinette Rangel. I'm the class of 2009, and I'm one of the New York City Alumni Chapter volunteers. We're so excited to host our 5th edition of Middlebury Wine School. It's been really successful, our past sessions, so we really appreciate all the interest from alumni for these sessions. So for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, welcome. And for those coming back, we're glad to have you here. Before I introduce this evening's host, I want to just cover some housekeeping items. This is a Zoom meeting, so you guys can turn on your camera and see other people. A bunch of you have, it's great, but we encourage you to. It's nice to see so many Middlebury faces on our screens. We're going to mute all participants during class just so we don't have any sound issues, but we really encourage you to ask questions throughout this evening. It's meant to be an interactive, fun conversation. So just feel free to use the chat and ask questions, and I'll ask them of Alex throughout the evening. So for the next 45 minutes, all you need is yourself for our journey across the Alps. And I want to introduce our wonderful host this evening, Alex Dessouky, Middlebury class of 96 and Arabic School class of 99. Alex began his career as a Cairo-based marketing representative for Denmark's Carlsberg beer, launching the brand there in 1999. After 3 years in Egypt, he transitioned to the California wine business, where he worked for more than 15 years with a focus on progressive sales, marketing and production companies centered on helping small to medium-sized wineries succeed in a rapidly consolidating US market. Then in 2019, Alex founded Barrel Down Selections, an importer and distributor of hand-selected, small production, regeneratively farmed wines from regions across Europe. Alex lives in Santa Barbara, California, with his wife, Hillary, and daughters, Lyle and Sasha. Thank you so much, Alex, for doing this for Middlebury alumni who are tuning in from across the country, which is so fabulous, and for giving us that wonderful discount to enjoy your wines. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Antoinette, and thank you, Matt, for putting together this great session and series of wine tasting events. As Antoinette said before, I think we should all pour a glass if you haven't already. We won't talk specifically about it just yet, but I don't like talking without something in my glass. So cheers to everyone. Thanks for joining. Good to see so many people from so many different parts of the country. I'm already nervous. I saw 3 or 4 people with MAs in German on the call, so I'm sure I'm going to butcher some of the German names here, and my apologies in advance. But as Antoinette said, I'm the founder of Barrel Down Selections, a small import and distribution company based here in California that I founded just over a year ago. Had the opportunity to decide what I wanted to do next in my career, and wanted to start working with wines and people that fit not only the things that I like from a personal perspective, but also on a bigger level, wines that are grown and made with a focus on not only quality, but their impact on the earth and the environment as well. That led me to Europe, where organic and biodynamic farming is a little bit more established and mainstream than it is here in the US. Much more percentage of vineyards in Europe are organic and biodynamic than they are in the US. That's hopefully something that will change over time. But for now, places like Austria and Germany have the highest relation of organic vineyards to conventionally farmed vineyards of anywhere else on Earth. So that was one of the focuses. Cool climate is another reason that I was interested in these alpine wines. You've got the Alps, which is this 1,000-mile-long air conditioning unit that cools down Western Europe. And that cool climate function provides a couple things to these wines and to all cool climate wines, but typically these wines are much higher in acid. Can everyone hear me okay? Typically these wines are much higher in acid because they have a much longer ripening period. So the sugars are not as high You maintain much greater acidity. Acidity is really the backbone of all great wines, I believe. You also have wines that are much lower in alcohol because sugar is a direct corollary to the final alcohol in a wine. So these wines typically have lower alcohol. Nothing we have tonight will be less, I think, more than 13%. But if you go to sort of a Napa Valley or Southern Rhone, you can easily get wines that top out 15 or 15 and a half, 16% even. So low alcoholic wines are good. They don't make me feel so bad when I have that last glass at the end of the night. Don't feel so bad the next morning. Cool climate's also important to me from a global warming perspective. There are a lot of places that are rapidly heating, specific to vineyards and wineries, and I wanted to be able to sell these wines in 20 and 30 years from now. So some of these cool climate areas will be better positioned to withstand some of the impacts of climate change going forward. The organic and biodynamic growing also helps create some natural resistance to things like drought and heat. So those are all positive things with cool climate wines. The organic and biodynamic function, in a nutshell, we'll talk more as we get into each specific wine, but none of these grapes are grown with any synthetic inputs. So no synthetic fertilizers, no synthetic herbicides or pesticides are used in the vineyards. That is extremely beneficial on a micro level to have healthy biodiverse soils, vines, environments, people. Ultimately, what goes in your body is healthy. It has bigger macro effects too in terms of the sequestration of carbon, the regenerative farming can have, the use of cover crops and things like that to introduce beneficial insects into a vineyard. No GMO is ever used in organic and biodynamic farming as well. So those are the sort of framework things that I check the box with when I'm putting a new winery into the portfolio. Haven't been able to travel to Europe in the last year to do much of that, but working with 10 great small family farmed multi-generational growers across those regions. So that's the portfolio in a nutshell. I think let's go ahead and dive into the first wine. And I've got a couple of quick slides here just to orient us to where they are and show you a couple images that I think will help you better understand some of the wines we're tasting. So this first wine we've got is the Schoedel Gruner Veltliner, which is from the Weinviertel, which is in the northeast part of Austria. So as you see, the topography kind of trail off on this map. The Alps sort of trail off just to the west of Vienna, but you get this great cool climate, breezes and weather that comes off the Alps there and influences that entire eastern portion of Austria where all the grapes grow. That green region up to the north, sort of around Vienna, is Niederösterreich or Lower Austria, and that's where most of the Gruner Veltliner in Austria is grown. The Weinviertel, where this comes from, is in that sort of northeast pocket as you get sort of over towards Slovakia. It's there that this Pannonian climate rolls in from the east, mixes with that cool climate coming off the Alps, and you get perfect growing weather for crisp white wines. Here are the Schoedels. I think Antoinette said they looked like a bunch of mid kids when we went through this a couple days ago. I think she's probably right. But you have Matthias on the left there, Leonard in the middle, and Victoria. They are third generation winemakers. They took control of the winery about 10 years ago, rapidly turned it into an organic winery, are beginning to work with biodynamic practices now. Young, super energetic, forward-thinking people making some outstanding wines that are also great values. As you look, you can see some cover crops there. You can see a little bit more of sort of the cover crop idea here. You may drive around some places and see just barren dirt in between rows, and that's because those farmers are using herbicides to essentially kill off whatever's in there to make it easier for them to farm just the grapes. Organic wineries want to promote as much biodiversity as possible, and cover crops are one way to do that. You've got some Gruner in the bins there. Those are those ubiquitous red bins you see across Europe. Always a symbol of a small artisan handcrafted wine. They're handpicking the grapes. They're putting them in those small bins. So the grapes stay intact. There's no crushing, no spontaneous fermentation, any bad stuff happening. So you can always be assured, if you see those in a vineyard, that they're a small family winery making high quality wines. Lastly, for this, you get some woolly weeders. Animals are a huge part of organic and biodynamic farming. They are the main source of compost / fertilizer in any organic vineyard. You also get their ability to kind of weed through the rows as opposed to just firing up your diesel tractor and mowing. You can set these guys loose for a few days, and it's amazing the amount of grass and things that these guys can eat up.
We have a question, which is, what kind of plants are used as the cover crops?
It depends on the area, but typically it's a combination of grasses, some legumes, and some flowering plants. Typically, you also want to invite pollinators into the vineyards. So things that are pollinating plants are typically used in there. You'll see mustard oftentimes, nettles. It just really depends on where that vineyard is and what are some of the indigenous plants and things that are best used in the vineyard. All right, so Gruner Veltliner, for those less familiar, it's a medium to light-bodied white wine. I think it really is a great alternative to, say, Sauv Blanc or Chardonnay, kind of right in the middle there. Has great acidity like a Sauv Blanc, a little bit more fruit. It has what's known as sort of an herbal snap to the wine. You can almost pick up some herbaceous tones, a little bit of pepper, but a really great food wine, goes well with spicy dishes. The classic pairing is a traditional Wiener Schnitzel, which is just about the most ideal pairing I can think of. But again, you've got great acidity in this wine. You can kind of feel that mouth-watering kind of pucker on the inside of your cheeks, and that's that acidity really telling your body that you have thirst and you want another sip. So that's always a positive thing.
On the topic of cover crops, why are they important, and are they used in the U.S. in wine growing, grape growing?
Yeah, cover crops are important for a couple different reasons. One, they keep the soil intact. The world loses a lot of topsoil every year just due to wind and erosion due to rains and things like that. The root systems of the cover crops hold the soil in place. It also requires a lot less tilling. Tilling is a really an aspect of farming that is kind of ingrained, but when you till a lot, you actually are releasing carbon that's very beneficial to the soil. You're releasing that carbon actually into the atmosphere, where it's very detrimental to the atmosphere, as it kind of is a key factor in climate change. So the cover crops can help kind of mitigate some of that release. And you also get the beneficial insects that are coming in to the vineyard to hopefully eat less beneficial insects. You're also bringing pollinators in to increase the overall biodiversity of the vineyard and the farm. They are used in the US. There are lots of wineries that see the benefit of that, not just certified organic or biodynamic wineries, but it's a key aspect of organic farming.
So you started your career in California and you've moved over to working with European wines. Can you talk about some of the differences in the producers that you work with or the industry?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is U.S. wine business is really driven by about 10 of the biggest wine producers in the U.S. They account for almost 75% of the wine that's on the shelf in the US. So you have this very small group of producers really directing what most US consumers are drinking on any given day. So there's been a massive amount of consolidation and acquisition, both in the supply side, but also the distribution side, which is unfortunately kind of limited consumer choice, in my opinion. There are lots of small guys in the U.S. Trying every day to get their wines into the market. The same with imports coming from Europe and places like that. The European market interested me from a personal perspective. Those are the wines that I've always liked to drink. In putting this company together, where I had finally the opportunity to make my own decisions about which wines to represent and the relationships to foster, it was always going to be wines from this area where organic and biodynamic farming is really a little bit ahead of where it is here in the States.
And these are small producers. How do you go about finding them?
A lot of introductions. I worked in the California business for a long time, but we handled a lot of imports into the U.S. So when I started this, I was beginning to reach out to people I knew in Europe, and they were directing me to lots of great growers. I spent time meeting them, eating with them, meeting their families, walking the vineyards, just making sure that our belief systems were aligned and the wine quality was something I was sure I could sell in the U.S. We did a lot of research, my wife and I, lots of tasting here and there, everywhere. Door knock that we'll taste in a bit. That was actually a wine that we had in the Dolomites several years ago, and that was sort of the light bulb that went off in my head that wines this good weren't being imported into the U.S. And that was something that I thought I could be a part of.
Carola had some questions about the Gruner. Is it grown in other parts of the world, and is it known by other names?
It is grown in other parts of the world. It's the most widely planted grape in Austria. It grows a little bit in Germany, a little bit in northern Italy. California grows some in cool climate regions very close to the coast. I think you'd probably be able to find some in the Finger Lakes region as well, a domestic cool climate area. But when you think Gruner, you really tend to think about Austria. It's really the home base for that varietal.
And how many cases by the Schottels do you get per year, since they're small? Sort of a sense of.
It's in the hundreds, not the thousands, for all these producers. They maybe produce between 5,000 and 20,000 bottles per year. It's not very much. And I distribute primarily in California and then nationally via e-commerce. So it's a couple, 4 or 5 pallets of wine for each producer every year, something like that.
Since we're on the topic of the Gruner, how does it compare to others? Is it a broad category of flavors like Chardonnay, or are they similar?
It's a little more compact, the flavor profiles that you get in Gruner Veltliner. Certain areas are known for slightly different styles. A little bit further to the west, you have some famous regions, Kremstal, Kamptal, and Wachau. And each of those has their own slight differentiation. Wachau is much more rock in terms of its soil, so you get a much more linear Gruner Veltliner. The Weinviertel is a little bit more varied in its soils. There's a lot more loess, which is just sort of like a loose topsoil. So you get slightly richer wines. But you're always going to get good acidity. You're always going to get that little herbal snap, a little bit of pepper, and then some of the fruit flavors can kind of vary, again, based on the soils and the climate.
We have a question from one of your classmates, Shannon. How have tariffs affected your business?
Tariffs have not been good for the wine business as a whole, for anyone, whether they're a domestic producer or an import brand or a wholesaler or a restaurant. It's been unfortunate that wine's kind of been brought into this, primarily this WTO battle between Boeing and Airbus. But currently, the tariffs relate only to wines from France, Spain, Germany, and sparkling wine from the UK. I only import wines from Germany from that list, so I've been spared a bit of the pain. But it's a 25% tariff that has to be eaten by someone somewhere along the supply chain. So it's not easy, and hoping for some sort of resolution to that in the near future.
Yeah. How long for Gruner in the cellar?
A wine like this is made to be drunk upon release. This is a nice, easy drinking, crowd pleasing wine. This is one of the best sellers in our portfolio. There are more serious Gruners out there that can be laid down for a decade or more. But typically Gruners are made for pretty immediate enjoyment.
Relatedly, someone asked, does biodynamic and organic mean fresher drink now wines?
No, that wouldn't, not necessarily. Wines that are grown organically and biodynamically have the potential to age just as long as a conventionally farmed wine. So no real difference. You could get into some nuance with certain biodynamic or natural wines that may not have any added sulfites, things like that may sort of lessen the overall sort of ageability of a wine, but the growing doesn't impact ageability at all.
When we're looking to support these biodynamic producers in our local wine stores, what do we look out for? I feel like there's so many different types of labels for, like you said, natural and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to denote some of these terms. You know, you've got natural wine, you've got sustainable wines. Those are a little bit squirrely in terms of definition, but organic and biodynamic wines are certified. So you can typically look on the back label and you'll see a certifying body. For a biodynamic wine, you'll see the Demeter logo here. Demeter is the most widely recognized biodynamic certification body. You'll see other CCOF is a very big California organic certifying body, so you'll see their logo. It's important to look for that. Other certifying bodies, but you can be sure, at least with biodynamic and organic, that you're actually getting a certified wine. The winery and the cellar is audited every year by that organization to make sure that they're in line with all of those necessary steps to keep the wine organic or biodynamic.
Yeah. Whereas the others for like natural, you can have more variation within that since it's not.
Yeah, it's an undefined term, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives people a lot of wiggle room to make wine the way they want. But a natural wine could be real funky, or it could be extremely clean. It's just a matter of the expertise that's being used in the vineyard, in the cellar, and what that wine grower or winemaker is looking to produce.
Great. Should we move to our next wine?
Let's do it.
And while we're pouring our next glass, I have another question, which is how can the grower cover their costs if they're selling something like 5,000 bottles of ready to drink wine? Seems difficult.
Yeah. I would say someone making 5,000 bottles of wine that's going to be a much higher priced product at the end of the day. Shodel is making many more bottles than that. But if you're making a truly artisan, higher price wine, you could probably cover your costs if you were a very streamlined organization with proceeds from something like that. But they're right. It's a very small amount. A lot of these guys also may sell some of their grapes to other producers in the area. So there's some other revenue streams that these guys use to make sure that they're only using the best grapes to make the wines with their names on it. And then typically they have some other ways to move grapes or consult for other wineries in winemaking, other things like that.
Cool. So what do we have next?
Okay, we're moving up to Germany, and I'll throw the map up one more time here. All right, so now we're in Franken. From an Alpine perspective, this is probably the least impacted by alpine climate. You do have the Bavarian Alps at the very southern part of Germany near Munich. So you do get some of that influence moving up north and interacting kind of with the continental climate there. But Franken is a unique place because Germany is obviously known for Riesling. That's always been the primary draw to German wine, has been the Riesling, grown in places like the Mosel, Rhine-Hessen, places in the western part of the country. Franken is unique in that for hundreds of years, they have focused almost solely on the Sylvaner grape. It's a grape they planted there in the 1600s. And it is known to be the place where Sylvaner grows best of anywhere in the world. So it's a super unique sort of microcosm of German wine, and one that I was really interested to get involved with. Here is Martin Steinmann. He is the 15th generation winemaker at Schloss Sommerhausen. So for our American sense of history, thinking about 15 generations of winemaking can kind of be sort of a mind bender. But his family started making wine at Schloss Sommerhausen in the mid 1500s. And he's been at the helm for the past 20 or 30 years. He's a huge proponent of organic farming and a huge outspoken benefactor of Franken wines and the unique white wines that grow in that region. You get a sense for the steepness of the vineyards in Franken with this picture. We drove up in his truck with these super skinny off-road tires, and I was leaning up against this, the side of the car, trying to enable us not to kind of roll down the other side. But you get a feeling for this deep, really steep vineyard landscape that's in Franken. This is sort of that same vineyard pulled out quite a ways. So it's in places in as much as I believe 80% gradient. So we're talking about really, really steep vines. The benefit here is the water drains super well from hillside vineyards. You're not getting pooling at the bottom, which makes the vines suck up all that water. You therefore get really sort of diluted and flabby grapes. You also get much more canopy, a lot more leaves that can inhibit the grapes from getting ripe. You also get what's called an auditorium effect in terms of sunlight exposure. You get nice, even sun throughout the day, as opposed to valley vineyards where you're getting a much more angled sunlight direction during the day. And you also have a nice ability to be sort of frost protectant up in the hillsides, whereas frost kind of gathers in the valley. You have this inversion layer of slightly warmer air. It happens at about 50 feet up to 400 feet. And you get that nice frost protectant from that as well.
Are these vines planted more densely, or is it just the photograph that makes it look that way?
It's just the photograph. The rows may be a little closer than what you're used to, but we're catching this probably at sort of peak growing season, so you're seeing a lot of leaves. But it's a pretty normally spaced vineyard.
Can you talk about some of the notes for this wine and also what you'd eat it with? I know you
Yeah.
mentioned that in the email, but I'm not sure that everyone necessarily caught your parents.
Yeah. So when we talk about this wine, I talk a lot about minerality, and that's because, as you see in this picture, a couple feet below the soil, topsoil, is this pure, dense limestone. So you're actually having the vines, some as much as 15 or 20 meters deep, going into this rock, looking for nutrients, looking for water. And the correlation between that and what I pick up in terms of minerality in this wine is it's kind of hard to deny. So I think that sort of chalkiness that you may pick up in this wine is what I would call minerality. Same in the nose too. You get sort of that dusty rock character. And then from a fruit perspective, I get tons of great pear flavor in this, sort of a firm pear, not the mushy pear that's been like in the fruit bowl for a couple weeks, but sort of a nice, firm, fresh pear.
And how old are these vines?
The vines themselves are about 30 years old. What's interesting in this vineyard, the Steinbach vineyard, there are written records that date older vines back to the year 1172 from that vineyard that we were just looking at. So pushing 1,000 years of viticulture on that little hillside that we were just looking at. I'll quickly look at the label here just so you can kind of understand a German label. It's not super intuitive. Schloss Sommerhausen, you see here, Schloss is just a manor or a chateau. Sylvaner's the grape. Sommerhauser Steinbach is just the single vineyard appellation. And then something to look for in German wines is this eagle with the grapes in the middle. That's the VDP consortium. And that is the top 200 wineries in Germany. So the top 1% belong to this consortium. And they rate the vineyards of each of those wineries as to how true that vineyard is to the expression of terroir, site, and variety. And then they rate the vineyards. You'll see on the skirt here, it's VDP Estelaja. That's a premier cru level site. So if you're familiar with Burgundy, that's a premier cru level wine or first class level wine. So just a little bit of a cheat sheet on German wine. It's not the easiest of labels to read.
Can you just say what terroir is for those who might not know?
Yes, terroir is the French term for natural environment. So it really is everything around a vineyard that may impact how that vineyard functions, how the grapes grow, how they taste. So it's the soil, the microbial life in that soil. It's the aspect of the vineyard, which direction it faces. It's the climate, it's the wind, it's the sun. It's that entire sort of encapsulation of everything that goes on in the natural world.
So we talked about this bottle before class. You said people love it or they hate it. Can you talk to us about what the bottle shape situation is?
Yeah, I'm sure people were trying to like find some way to store this in their cellar or their cooler or their rack, and we're having a fit based on the shape. But the shape is called the Boxbeutel, and it was developed specifically for Franken wines in the 1700s because wineries around Franken were trying to sell their wine off as Franken wines, but it was lower quality. So they decided to create their own bottle for as a symbol of origin, as a symbol of quality. You'll hear when you go there that the real reason is they wanted a flat-sided bottle so it wouldn't roll down the steep vineyards if it ever fell. You'll also hear that the priests way back when wanted an unobtrusive bottle that was flat, that they could kind of stick into their satchel and not be discovered, you know, as they were walking around town and having a little bit of wine. But that's the purpose and the origin of that shape.
Is the Sylvaner grape usually used as a single grape, or is it often mixed with other grapes?
In Germany, it's typically a single grape. You'll see a lot of Sylvaner in Alsace in France, where you'll see it spelled with a Y, not an I, just from a language thing. And there, Sylvaner can be blended with other grapes. So if you see a Sylvaner from Alsace, it can have a couple of different other grapes blended in with it. It's not 100%, but in Germany, it's typically 100% varietal wine.
Is the slight cloudiness due to the limestone?
Slight cloudiness is due to the fact that none of these wines are filtered or fined. So another aspect of minimal interventionist winemaking is to not filter or fine the wines prior to bottling. It can strip some of the natural characteristics from the wine. It can also lead to a slight cloudiness, but most people would rather have the natural quality throughout, even at the expense of a little bit of cloudiness.
One of our participants says they smell a slight bit of petrol. Is that the minerality? Is that usually how folks describe it when they're tasting wines with minerality?
It could be. Yeah, I think you get a lot. You do get that petrol characteristic in a lot of German wines. You get that in a lot of Riesling as well. I think it's probably a function of terroir to some extent, to grape. Riesling is a grape that gives off a lot of petrol characteristics, and Sylvaner to a lesser extent.
Great. Should we shift to our next wine?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Next wine is the Dornoch number 9. This is Pinot Nero, or just Pinot Noir. And of the 4 wines tonight, this is the one that's biodynamically grown. So a little bit different than organic. Biodynamics is really a form of organic farming that I think has a little bit more rigor. It really looks to the interrelatedness of all things in the farm system, sort of a holistic approach to farming where everything that's used in the vineyard should be sourced from within that farm. So animals are a big part of biodynamic farming. They produce all of the compost that goes into the vineyard. Chickens are in the rows, eating bugs. You have the sheep and goats that are up in the vineyards doing the weeding. You have an apiary typically that's doing, so you have bees on site to help with pollination. And then of course in a real functioning biodynamic farm, you're using that apiary for honey. You're using those animals for meat. If you eat meat, you're using the animals for dairy and eggs. So you have this real closed system where there's, I think the truest expression of terroir really can come out. And then quickly, just to orient us again. So we look at here, we're in the Alto Adige, which is the very northeast corner of Italy. This winery is just south of Bolzano. If you're familiar with that city. It's this huge glacial valley called the Adige Valley, and real cool climate wine growing is here. It's quite extreme. On a clear day, you can see sort of the red-hued Dolomite mountains kind of glowing in the distance. So we're really really in the heart of the Alps here. This is Patrick Uccelli. You can tell he loves life. This is actually us tasting the wine we have in our glass tonight, exactly a year ago. So right after harvest, it was done fermenting. It was in a mix of steel and large oak, kind of just resting and aging. And that's the last time I was there to see him. But he's a true sort of visionary biodynamic farmer. He and his family grow 75% of everything that they need to live from a food standpoint on their farm. So he's really embraced the biodynamic farming mentality and is making some incredible wines. This is the manor. You can kind of see it on the label, that sort of tower. You can for sure see just the ultra biodiverse nature of this vineyard. It just kind of screams happy vineyard. There's just great energy here, just beautiful fruit, everything in perfect balance. And then one of the donkeys here that does a lot of the weeding and again, pulling certain things when a tractor isn't required.
Is he a first-generation winemaker?
He's not. They've owned that property since the 1800s, 1836, and for years they sold their grapes. But he is a trained enologist and viticulturalist. His wife Caroline is a biologist. So they took over the family estate in 2008, and they've been making their own wine there for the last 12 years.
And is that when it converted to being biodynamic wine?
Yes. Yeah. First organic and then biodynamic in 2011.
I love this question. Don't the animals eat the grapes and the grape leaves? Like, how do we know they're twin?
They're well-trained animals. Very well trained.
Okay. And then folks are asking about your language skills. Do you speak German, Italian, French, since you're working in those countries a lot, or?
I wish the answer was yes. It's pigeon at best. A few wine terms in each language seems to get me by. Yeah, Arabic is not really helping me up in Northern Europe, but no real language skills, unfortunately, other than a bit of Spanish and however that relates to these other languages.
So a lot of folks are picking up on the fact that it's very light color. And that maybe if you could give a comparison to Pinot Noir. And also, I would say I'm in the same boat as, I forget who made this comment, but it's a very intense smelling wine. So if you could talk about it.
I would love to. Yeah. So in cool climate areas, you're going to get typically lighter color. You're not going to get as much extraction in the grapes. And that's just due to the fact that these are cool areas that don't get super ripe. So that's going to impact what are known as sort of the phenolics in a grape, the things that give skin's color. Doesn't take away from this wine's intensity, as you said. This is a very new wine. Patrick would call this a vin de soif, or a thirst wine. It's made to be drunk upon release very early. Glue is a term that you might hear in some natural wine bars recently about wines that are made to be drunk young like this. You might get actually some SO2, some sulfites that haven't fully integrated into this wine yet. So you might get, especially in the nose, a little bit of that funk. And I think that's also due to the minimal intervention that's done in the cellar with this winery and that Patrick practices in all of his wines. He's a very skilled and professional winemaker, but he likes to let the wines really do the talking. So I think in a month or two, I think you'd see some of that funk a little bit on the nose settle down. I think if you let this aerate for another 15, 20 minutes, you'd probably see a lot of that leave as well. But I think underneath that, you get this just intense energy, rich strawberry, raspberry, undergrowth some of the hallmarks of good Pinot Noir.
Wouldn't be a Zoom if I did not unmute myself. Where do the sulfites in the wine come from?
Sulfites are naturally occurring compounds in grapes and other fruits and vegetables. Onions have a lot of sulfites. Dried fruit has lots of sulfites, but there's a little bit naturally occurring in a grape. But almost all winemakers add a little bit of added sulfites just prior to bottling as a stabilizer, preservative for the wine. With organic and biodynamic, you'll find that they're only allowed to have 100 parts per million of added sulfites, whereas conventional wines can have up to 350 parts per million. And again, that limited amount of sulfites really, again, helps express, I think, the true nature of a vineyard and a wine. Sulfites can definitely alter the taste and flavor of a wine, especially if they're added early in the winemaking process. All these wines have much less than 100 parts per million, and they're all added just prior to bottling, again, just to give the wine a little bit of stability and preservation aspects. Yeah, this wine, I mean, is truly one of my favorites. Patrick was my first partner in this venture. To see him at work and to see the passion that he has for his wines and his land and his family it's kind of awe-inspiring. And I think this would be a true natural wine in my opinion. It's certified biodynamic, but you have a guy that knows what he's doing in the cellar. He makes the right decisions to make a very clean, natural wine, and he's had much success recently here and back home in Europe.
I feel like very often people, or more recently, are saying like you should look for sulfate-free wine. Is there a reason that there are people moving to that trend, and why we shouldn't be afraid of having some sulfites in our wine?
There are a small percentage of people that actually have some allergic reactions to sulfites. Typically, though, I think it's more about people overserving themselves and thinking that sulfites had something to do with how they're feeling. It's really not a widespread allergic condition. So a little sulfites is really not an issue, I think, for the broad population. But again, these wines, organic wines, biodynamic wines, they use as little as possible, strictly as a preservative. Other conventionally farmed wines can use many more parts per million. Again, if it's not necessary, why put it in there?
Yeah. So we can't blame the sulfites on our hangovers.
Fortunately not.
Someone asked, what's the best part of your job, and do your kids enjoy an occasional sip?
The best part of my job is twofold. It's making these relationships with these growers. I kind of went into this wanting to create relationships with people that believed what I believed in terms of wine, the wine industry, how wine should be made, how wine should be sold. So that's been a huge upside to this venture. And then obviously for me, turning people on to these wines, consumers, is really gratifying. Again, it's a new experience. It's a new venture, new wines in the marketplace. A lot of these have not been in the U.S. before. Some have been in certain places, but not all. So turning people on to, a Sylvaner from Franken, it's been amazing what people's reaction has been to these new wines and breaking people out of maybe the molds they were in terms of what they were drinking previously.
Someone asked what the 9 is on the bottle.
So Patrick, who's a bit eccentric, he created this label last year, and he numbers all of his wines sequentially. So the previous vintage of this wine from 2018 was the 2. So this year it's the 9. And next year it will be whatever, the 16. He believes that no wine is the same, and therefore he's not going to label any wine with the same label, which I told him was a marketing and sales, disaster. But he's sticking to his guns. So the 9 is just this bottling and in this iteration in this vintage year. All the 9, the 2, the 9, the 16, etc., will all have this sort of light red dot as a sort of constant theme, but that's the history of that label.
Great. Should we turn to our last wine?
Yes. All right. Last wine here is the Aldo Marenco Dolcetto di Doliani. I'll share my screen one last time. Okay, so we're moving from east to west in northern Italy, now in Piedmont, which of all the regions you guys may be most familiar with, it's where wines like Barolo and Barbaresco come from, made with the Nebbiolo grape. The other 2 primary red grapes in Piedmont are Barbera and Dolcetto. And Dolcetto is most famous in terms of its spiritual home in the village of Doliani, which is in the sort of southern portion of Piedmont, this high elevation, cool climate site that's just south of Barolo. Here's the crew. You've got Claudio Marenco here in the short sleeve tan shirt. He's the 4th generation farmer. Those are his parents. Piedmont farmers are the most traditional, hardworking, no BS farmers of any region that I've worked with. They are so in tune with their land. They have no ego, despite the fame of their region, and they just get it done year in and year out. It's really, really impressive. Here's their organic Dolcetto vineyard. Again, you see the cover crops, you see the red bins, you see just a vineyard that looks incredibly healthy and kind of makes you want to roll around or have a picnic in those cover crops. It's just a quintessential organically grown vineyard. So this wine here is the Souris. You'll see that, and that is the fanciful name, but that's the orientation of the vineyard. It is faces the southeast, and that's what Souris means in Piedmont dialect. So when you plant grapes in cool climate areas, you want to get as much sun as you can. And in most growing regions, south or southeast exposition is where you're going to get optimal in order to ripen your grapes. These guys converted to organic farming in the 1970s, which is pretty amazing considering A, how traditional Piedmont is, B, that was sort of the height of sort of industrial farming when synthetic fertilizers were being pushed hard by big agricultural companies. They were really ahead of the curve on that, and they have generations of Piedmont knowledge that go into this Dolcetto.
You know the Alps.
Floral, rose, violet, tar. I mean, you get all the classic Piedmont characteristics in a slightly different sort of framework as opposed to like a Nebbiolo or a Barbera. Dolcetto has a little bit higher tannin, lower acid than some of those other Piedmont varieties. Makes it, I think, really food friendly. It'd be great with pizza, pasta, grilled meats. I mean, it's pretty much it's a crowd pleaser if there ever was one.
Someone said it tastes like autumn in a glass, which I liked.
Very nice. I may use that.
What's the grape varietal?
The grape varietal is Dolcetto. Dolcetto means sweet little one in Italian because the grapes are very small and they're tightly bunched together. The reason it's not on the label, there are certain areas that are so well known for a certain variety in Italy, like Barolo, which is a region, not a grape. It's made from Nebbiolo. Dolcetto is so famous from Doliani that the Italian authorities don't even put the name of the grape on the label. So you see Doliani, you're supposed to know that it's Dolcetto. It's a measure of respect for that region. But yeah, so it's not always totally intuitive that that's the grape in the bottle.
Yeah. Now we all know. I assume this is one of your class of 96 friends, but they're asking how much wine should we drink each evening? What's the recommended from a professional?
There's at least a bottle consumed in my house every night.
What a great life.
No one should be afraid of that, especially organic and biodynamic wines.
Yeah.
2 people, that's correct. My wife and I split a bottle every night. Sure.
Someone asked us for rounding out the tasting why you picked these 4 wines in particular. How did you sort of feel that they balanced each other out, or why do you want to showcase these ones?
I wanted to showcase certain areas. I work in 3 different countries. I wanted to make sure I had at least one wine representative from each country. 2 whites, 2 reds seemed like a good balance. I wanted to make sure I had a balance of organic and biodynamic wines, and I wanted them to be cost effective enough to make sure everyone got to enjoy them without spending a whole lot of dough.
How can we hear so much about Dolcetto d'Alba and not, I'm going to butcher this, Dogliani? Yeah,
so Dolcetto d'Alba is a much broader appellation for Dolcetto, and it's a geographically much larger area, so they produce more of it. It's sort of said that, in Alba, where Barolo is king, those wineries grow Dolcetto, so they have something to drink while their Barolo ages. So it's not necessarily the focus of their winemaking, but in Doliani it is, and it's just a much smaller, more compact area. And if you saw Doliani on a label and you weren't familiar with that labeling construct, you might pass kind of right over it, which is maybe one of the flaws in their labeling laws. But certainly, if you see Doliani, you can know that that's from a winemaker that focuses primarily on Dolcetto. The wines from Doliani tend to be a little bit richer, more complex than Dolcettos from that broader Alba or Asti appellation.
Of course, it wouldn't be a Middlebury event if we didn't talk about climate change. So how has climate change impacted wine from the Alps?
Just like everywhere, it's getting warmer. I think in cool climate areas like these, they have the benefit of, in the past, there were years when they might not even ripen their grapes because of how cool it was. Now, I work with a winery in the far northern part of Germany where that was the case. Now they have perfect ripening every year. So it's happening everywhere. I think regenerative farming is one way that we can help to mitigate some of those impacts. Carbon sequestration that I talked about earlier. You also get vines that are naturally able to deal with these changes in climate and environment when you're not spraying them with synthetic inputs, when they're essentially growing their own immunity, learning how to deal with drought and pests. And there are studies that show that organic and biodynamic vineyards are less susceptible to a lot of this stuff. So it's happening everywhere. Again, regenerative farming can actually help to offset some of that by sequestering carbon. We talked about low till. We talked about cover crops, holding soil down and not emitting carbon into the atmosphere. So, I hope that by giving these, letting these wines be tasted by people out there, that they can learn a little bit more about that. And as people's buying habits change to organic and biodynamic, they can know that they're in some small way helping to offset some of what's happening in terms of climate change.
Got a couple more questions before we round out the evening with the toast. Are these wines fermented in concrete?
This one is, yeah, that's the picture I popped up a second ago. Old school Piedmont producers age a lot of wines in concrete, which is a really cool vessel, I think. It's not anaerobic like steel. It does have some oxidative properties. Some oxygen gets through the concrete, but not as much as oak. So you get a wine that is a bit softer on the edges, but not super steely like a stainless steel wine might be. And it still highlights that sort of fruit flavor, doesn't have any impact of oak either to sort of offset that primary fruit character. So I think concrete's a cool aging vessel, and these guys, they have, it's probably 100 years old. They reline it every so many years to keep the integrity of the vessel intact.
My two final questions. Do you represent any amphora fermented wines? And what do you think about that trend in Southern Europe? And for those of us who don't know what amphora fermented wines are, maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, amphora is the ancient vessel that was used to ferment lots of things. I think wine is one of them. There's even, I think, beer amphora from back in the Pharaonic ages that was used. But I personally don't use any work with any people that use amphora. Again, it's another vessel. It's typically terracotta or something like that. So what you're getting is a different source of oxidative input to the wine. You're also, because of the shape, you're getting supposedly this sort of induction as the wine ferments. It pulls some of the ethers and some of the phenolic compounds sort of up and then back. And I don't know what the overall benefits are. I've tasted many amphora wines and they're quite good, but I don't work with any.
Okay, and then the last question was a global question, which you sort of touched upon when at the beginning of class. You said that I think it was 75% of wines that are on our shelves are from about 10 producers. How do we keep an eye out for small producers if it's such a dominated market?
Shop at small independent wine shops. The big producers, and I've got nothing against them, but they own the supermarket shelves. They own the drugstore shelves. They own all of the sort of chain accounts in terms of restaurant business. So to work with small independent wineries, work with your local small independent wine shop.
Definitely. Well, we so appreciate you doing this. It's been really fabulous. I know I've seen some people in the chat who are like, can we do this every year? And this is the 5th edition of Middlebury Wine School. For some of you, it might be the first, but we've done 5 sessions and we plan to do more in the future. We're going to have one with Lincoln Peak Vineyard that is right outside of Middlebury in New Haven, Vermont. And that'll probably be in December or January. So you guys should stay tuned for that. But to the extent that you know other Middlebury graduates who are in the wine industry, we'd love for them to host events like wonderful hosts like Alex give us the opportunity to all get together and enjoy wine together and learn a lot about these fantastic small producers. So Alex, I don't know if you want to mention the discount again, because it was in the beginning of class and perhaps not everyone caught it, but it's really awesome that you're giving that to all the Middlebury.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll throw it up here. I know Thanksgiving's coming up, so I want to give you guys the opportunity Let's see. There we are. Hold on. All right. So between now and November 15th, I'm happy to give you guys, oops, sorry. Here we go. 20% savings in the same flat rate ground shipping through 15th. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to be home with your families for Thanksgiving, if not indefinitely. So order up between now and the 15th and order some wines for the holiday period. And then the current 15% will be good through the end of the year after that November 15th little spiff up to 20%. Same promo code, and definitely pass this along to your friends and family if they might be interested in purchasing some wine.
Yeah. Thank you again, Alex. And it's so nice to support Middlebury businesses and also just have wonderful evenings like this where we can connect virtually when we're in this quarantine situation. So thank you again for doing this. And thank you everybody who joined us tonight. It's really been such a pleasure. And we will follow up after this class with an email with the information that Alex just posted about the discount. If you guys want to buy wines before Thanksgiving or the end of the year, and any, like, there have been some offline questions that we have, so we'll try to get back to you on those. And then also this class has been recorded, so I know some people were putting kids to bed or had technical difficulties, so you can definitely catch the recording, and you can also see all the other Middlebury wine schools on the YouTube page. So thank you again, guys, for tuning in. This has been wonderful. I hope everyone has a good rest of their night, and thank you again, Alex.
Thank you all. Super fun. Take care.